To the June 13th, 2016 work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight there are 8 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you are required to fill out a public comment card and turn it in to the city clerk. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of the item. Once the item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. Also, before we get started tonight, I would like to add an executive session to discuss personnel and pending litigation at the end of our work session. So, Ken, I guess we need to do a vote on that. So, if I have a motion and a second on the executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a vote or a motion from Karen Thurman and a second from Councilmember Moore to go into executive session at the end of this meeting to discuss personnel and pending litigation. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Joe, do you want to vote on that?
Aye.
All right. That's, none opposed. It's unanimous, City. So let's start. Do we have any public comment on the first item?
We do not, sir.
Okay. City, if you please call that item.
Our first item this evening is discussion of RZ 1518 to amend the AG1 Agricultural District, Chapter 64, Article 6, Division 2. Ms. Kathy Field.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, just for your just for background, the first 5 agenda items, RZ 15-18 through RZ 15-23, we've essentially made the same changes to each of these zoning districts. So whereas I'll be speaking from the AG1 zoning district, the same changes are embedded in the subsequent 4 items as well. Okay, so before I get to the actual text amendments, however, I would like to review with you a memo that staff has put together in terms of rural view sheds, because we are proposing some changes that not only are included in the text amendments, but also are administrative, all of which deal with the rural view shed. And then in addition, the last item on the agenda, Carter will be speaking about changes to Chapter 48, which also deal with proposed changes to the rural view shed. So with that, I'm going to proceed, and I'd like to begin with a memo that speaks to this issue. The Community Development Department recommends approval of the proposed text amendments discussed below and withdrawal of Chapter 50-162, Rural Design. Now that recommendation for withdrawal speaks to number 7 on the agenda tonight, okay? Staff notes at the Planning Commission's meeting on May 25th, 2016, they recommended approval of RZ 15-18, -19, -20, -21, and 23, and 24 as submitted in this packet. In addition, they recommended withdrawal of Chapter 50-162, Rural Design. And by way of background, the rural view shed required for single-family residential uses currently resides in the Milton Rural Overlay District that covers the city with the exception of parcels within the Deerfield and Crabapple form-based codes and the Birmingham Crossroads Overlay District and the Highway 9 Overlay District. The Mayor and City Council directed staff to propose changes to the rural view shed to assist in further preserving the view sheds in the city. Initially, staff had proposed to move the requirements of the rural view shed into the subdivision ordinance, Chapter 50-162, Rural Design of the City Code, or the Rural Milton Overlay District, RZ 15-24. After further research and discussion with the city attorney, staff determined that it would be most beneficial to the public and developers if it is incorporated into each zoning district, and that includes AG1, represented by RZ 15-18, R1, which is RZ 15-19, R2, RZ 50-20, R2A, RZ 15-21, and CUP, RZ 15-23 rather. Finally, it should be noted that it's staff's recommendation that all parcels will be required to be in conformance with the proposed rural viewshed standards, except parcels that are being developed with commercial and non-residential uses, pardon me, such as landscape businesses, kennel, or veterinary hospital, as they are required to be developed a maximum pardon me, of 30 feet from the road. This requirement is already within the rural Milton overlay. Specific issues addressed with accompanying action items. Number 1, street design. Issues regarding curb and gutter, deceleration and acceleration lanes, sidewalks, and trails have been addressed, and they will be addressed in Chapter 48, which Carter will be making the proposed amendments for tonight. 2, entrances. This is under the text amendments. Staff has proposed that all entrances, either to subdivisions or single-family residences, be rural, simple, and rustic in design. In situations where there is signage, it shall be shingle style, mounted in or on a pillar, and not to exceed 8 feet in height. In regards to walls, knee walls may be used where required by topography and constructed of natural materials or that give the appearance of natural materials. Gate or guard structures shall be set back a minimum of 60 feet from the right-of-way. And lastly, no water features are permitted at the entrance. Rural viewshed. Again, this is addressed within the proposed text amendments. The proposed rural viewshed is comprised of a 40-foot primary setback from exterior streets and a 20-foot secondary setback from the primary setback. Both setbacks are not permitted to have structures within the setbacks, and only septic systems can be allowed in the secondary setback if a primary variance is approved. In addition, a primary variance may be required in the primary setback, may be requested in the primary setback only if the primary and backup septic fields have failed and the Fulton County Health Department will condemn the property. Furthermore, the applicant will have to show proof to the Community Development Department of the pending condemnation. No disturbance within these two types of setbacks is permitted until a design review process is completed and the design of the rural viewshed is approved by the city arborist. Restrictions?
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm sorry, real quick. I'm just
Yes.
curious, and trying to understand, you have two different setbacks here. Was it specifically just for the septic system, or I want to understand the reason why, as we did that?
Well, as we originally wrote this, we had two setbacks. One was the 40, one was the 20. And we originally said that you could have a septic system in the secondary, which was the 20. When it went to Planning Commission wanted to make it more difficult to have any incursions into either the primary or the secondary. So with the secondary, they said that you would need a variance to allow a septic system in there. In the primary, in those instances where a house could be condemned for health purposes because there wasn't enough land for either a primary or a secondary septic, they put the requirement in that it would only be allowed if indeed both of those systems had failed and the house was going to be condemned. And the Planning Commission felt that that was enough of a hardship to allow that to be considered.
Maybe just to clarify again, I'm trying to picture in my mind a primary versus a secondary setback.
Okay, well, and that's a definition which we'll get to, but let me just get to it right now.
Right.
The primary is the first 40 feet starting with that backs up to the right-of-way, so the exterior. And then subsequent to that, the additional 20 feet is interior to that, contiguous to an interior to that first 40 feet. So 40 and then 20.
So a total of 60.
Correct. Primary and then secondary.
And so, and again, and that's part of why I'm questioning, why don't we just have one at 60 and determine a number on that? I'm just curious for the logic, and that's my own thinking.
Well, I think that they felt that the most protection should be given to the primary, to the first 40, and that the second 20 could be lesser. And so it was a matter of protection. So the secondary was the compromise, in essence? Yes, that's correct. Okay.
For the secondary, obviously you have a septic field or something. From the view, it's going to be natural. It's not going to be a structure or anything.
Right, that's right. And, but you would still, but based on the
Correct.
planning commission's recommendation, you would still need a variance for that incursion into the secondary area by a septic system.
Okay.
Okay? Yes,
And based on our code, in order to be granted that variance, you would have to have a hardship.
that is correct.
Okay. And it can't be a self-imposed hardship, so it would have to be something that had happened that would not allow you to put the septic tank somewhere else.
That is the intent.
Okay, to that point, I know there have been some controversy recently on variance, and I believe in one particular case, hardship was used for the appeal. How can we be consistent with the use of hardship in reviewing these variances going forward?
I think we can address that through our strategic planning that we're going to be working on in our current strategic planning process. We're going to be working on one of the proposals that Kathy's made of strategic planning with our various boards and committees and commissions to be able to make sure that we are aligned on, obviously, ultimately it's their decision. Is that
Yes, I think that's true. We also have we have in the past worked with the city attorney to strengthen those hardship requirements. That's also something else that we could work on. So there are means of doing that, but clearly the BZA is the appropriate board to determine variances based on hardships.
Further question?
Yes.
And in granting, going through a design review process, as it's spelled out here in the
Yes.
third to last sentence, what process, who conducts that design review process?
It is very specifically listed in the text amendment. We'll get into that. But to give you a little advance, it will be done by the city arborist. And because the thinking was that we couldn't say just no disturbance, because that's really not what we meant. Because under some instances, and we've already had one case where someone wanted to build a pasture that went into the rural view shed, which is a perfectly appropriate use for an agricultural area. And then we have some instances where you may not have enough trees in that rural view shed, and you may want to disturb the area to put in more trees. So by saying you shouldn't disturb that primary, at least the first 40 feet, we felt was a difficult position to put us in without having to verbally try to respond to all different types of instances. So the thought was, by having a case-by-case design review initiative undertaken by the city arborist, that we could address what was needed to protect or enhance or to create, under some instances, a pasture-type rural view shed.
By the way this reads here, it implies there's a review process in addition to the city arborist. That's why I brought up.
Oh, I see. Well, perhaps poorly written. But when you read the zoning text, it addresses it, and I would hope that it would be clear there. So we can discuss it at that time. Okay, so I'm at the bottom of page 2. No disturbance within these two types of setbacks is permitted until a design review process is completed and the design of the rural view shed is approved by the city arborist. Restrictions on landscaping and or disturbances within the view shed have been addressed in the proposed text amendment. The city arborist has created a recommended landscape plan for view sheds that will require additional plantings to provide screening when necessary. It is composed of a majority of native plantings, and if grass is used, it is to be fescue grass with a natural look and not formal in appearance. An example of a landscape plan is attached at the end of this memo. Under protection and enforcement of rural view sheds, and we also address this within the text amendments, staff has proposed that the view shed be reviewed by the city arborist via the conceptual plan and recommendations made to preserve or enhance it on a case-by-case basis. Once the conceptual plan and subsequently the LDP have been approved, a 4-foot tree-safe fence with signs indicating rural viewshed on the fence will be required to be installed prior to any disturbance or construction.
Kathy,
Yes, sir.
do we have other view sheds that we've defined within our ordinances? Is rural view shed the only view shed that we use in that context?
Which we have definitions for at the end, but
Right.
Robin, I'll ask you if you can respond to that inquiry.
I don't believe we have any other.
The reason I'm asking the question is we tend to use the term rural like it has a very well-defined meaning, and that it pops into our head immediately as to exactly what rural is. And I don't know that I've ever seen it defined in our ordinances. It may very well be that rural may have a very specific definition, but when we start combining it with other things like view shed, it just conjures up that this is a special view shed. It's not the normal view shed, it's the rural view shed. As if we're trying to enforce multiple view sheds, and I don't think that's the case. So I was just wondering, at some point, maybe we're gonna go back and try to clean some of that up, but it could be a little confusing.
So we do define, later in the text, we talk about, that was one of our issues that we had. We started using
Rural view shed or
but
rural?
Rural view shed.
Okay.
We don't
Yeah.
define rural, but we define rural view shed, because even when we created this rural view shed, we didn't have a definition,
Right,
and that's
right.
what we're including
Yeah.
in here. But as far as I know, there's, at least from a zoning perspective, there's no other view shed that's been defined.
Right, I didn't think there was. Okay, thanks.
Okay, you're quite welcome. Let's see. Okay, I'm on to Section 4, Protection and Enforcement of Rural View Sheds. Staff has proposed the view shed be reviewed by the city arborist via the conceptual plan and recommendations made to preserve and enhance it. Once the conceptual plan and subsequently the LDP has been approved, a 4-foot tree-safe fence indicating rural view shed on the fence will be required to be installed. B, creation of chain of title affidavit, and this also is addressed in the text amendment. And this really addresses the issue of, we can inform the developer and the builder that a rural view shed is in place, but what happens once the house is constructed and someone moves in, and then there's a new owner subsequent to that? How do we protect that knowledge and that existence of the rural view shed? So we did talk to the attorney, and we came up with the creation of chain of title affidavit. Prior to the transfer of any legal interest in an AG1 zone parcel that is subject to a rural view shed, every legal or beneficial owner of such a parcel shall cause to be recorded in the chain of title for the parcel and affidavit. In addition, a copy of the affidavit must be provided to any transferee of a legal interest in the parcel no later than the final closing of the transfer. In addition, staff will include the information regarding the chain of title affidavit to be included in the subdivision's homeowners association's documents. This requirement will be added to the final plat subdivision checklist. Lastly, the requirement will be outlined in the building permit checklist and application, as well as a certificate of occupancy application. Changes to other documents. Changes are proposed to the land disturbance permit, building site plan, and final plat, so as to indicate the location of the rural view shed on each of these documents. In addition, the location of any disturbances, additional plantings, etc., will be reflected on the LDP and individual site plan. Additional language will be included on the building permit issued by the city and signed by the applicant, acknowledging the rural view shed on the site and the requirements for preserving it. Changes to pre-construction meeting and checklists. All new developments currently require a pre-construction meeting prior to the construction of any development. At this meeting, staff will also review all of the requirements for preserving the rural view shed and how to handle development on the property to ensure the plans are adhered to. This meeting is already mandated within the development code. A revised checklist has been created for the development and preservation of the rural view shed to be reviewed and signed by the applicant at this meeting. Changes to the city's welcome packet. Discussions have been initiated with the communications department to include in the welcome packet sent to new property owners information about individual septic systems, stream buffers, and the rural view shed and the city's tree removal regulations. Education of existing property owners of rural view sheds. Staff, with the assistance of the GIS department, will mail information to existing property owners who own parcels that fall within the rural view shed. This initiative will help educate and encourage property owners to preserve their existing rural view shed. Changes to variance requirements. A recommendation was made to not allow applicants to request a primary variance for the purpose of reducing or eliminating the primary setback, which is 40 feet, except when the primary and replacement septic fields fail within the rural view shed. It is also recommended that if a septic system is required in the secondary setback, a primary variance would be required. Staff has consulted with the city attorney, and the advice given, if this policy is pursued, it should be reflected in appeals, Article 10 of the zoning ordinance, and not in the individual zoning districts. Staff is drafting language to reflect this proposed amendment and is prepared to take this change through the normal review process, should staff be given affirmative direction on this issue.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Article F and Article B. So in Article F, the educational process. So once this is all been codified, I guess we're going to notify all of those property owners within whatever view sheds we're talking about. So that will start this recording of the chain of title.
Well,
The affidavit will catch it on the title report, and therefore, chronologically, my expectation would be that it'll be picked up by the title lawyers, the mortgage lender, well before it'll be picked up in the welcome packet. The welcome packet is just another means of providing them that notice.
Okay.
That
I
makes
guess
sense.
my concern
Yeah.
was if a property was to be sold and whatever property owner bought it, would he be aware of the fact that there is one of these title affidavits attached to that property?
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick, which is, why we wanted something we could put in the chain. So presumably there will be the typical due diligence, the title opinion, the title insurance as part of any transaction. Now, your question is more nuanced than that, though. Will the actual property owner know about it? I'm sure the lenders will know about it, and the title attorneys and all those folks, but will they? Hopefully, maybe. Now, I think that's the whole purpose of E and F, though, is to provide more of a layman's. If you didn't pick it up in the title report, here is actually what your property is subject to, because it's the same issue we get when there's stormwater easements on your property. A lot of people don't know that until they run into violation of it. So that's the point.
I guess it's my concern for the property owners.
It's a fair point.
Yeah. If they're advertising their property as such, but it has additional easement on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to believe, though, that between the legal mechanism of the affidavit and then the informal mechanism of the welcome packets, the city of Milton has done everything within its power to provide sort of a bifurcated way of letting people know you've got this on your property.
That's my concern.
Since this would be a change to existing properties that qualify in the rural view shed, do we have a responsibility to send something to all the current property owners, letting them know that this is a change to really their use of their property?
No, I don't think we have a legal obligation to do that. Whether that might make good policy sense is a subject of debate. And perhaps it
I just don't want to be accused down the road of
Right.
changing what they could do with their property and not having notified them of it at the time we made the change.
We heard similar concerns whenever they begin to put expanded, 75-foot riparian buffers.
Right.
And, we did not, the jurisdictions that had those requirements did not necessarily send certified letters to everybody that was impacted, but did you think we did not get some fairly strongly worded criticism that
Right.
you've taken a bunch of my land? Absolutely. So there's a legal issue there. That didn't make it any less enforceable just because we didn't provide them notice. It was just as enforceable, but there also was a political sort of transparency, sort of citizen involvement aspect of it as well.
And do we have any idea how many property owners would fall under this?
no, we haven't had GIS sort through it yet, but it's our intention to, obviously this is all the exterior road properties.
Right.
And,
It just might make
yeah.
sense to go ahead and notify them in advance so that, we can't be accused of trying to do anything under the table, so. Because I don't know that most people, if they read that we're looking on the agenda, at making changes to the rural view shed would really even have a clue what that stood.
Well, to
that
Councilmember
meant.
Luft's point, many of them, if we don't do that, may find out about it when they're trying to sell.
Right, and that's
And
not.
that's when they'll find out about it.
Yeah,
When they're-
when they're getting ready to go to closing and find out there's a problem, then, you know, they,
That's upsetting.
yeah.
You know, I think too, I believe the intent, you know, this is more for future development, when you're putting a neighborhood in or whatever. You know, I know we've run into this before, if you just start blanket, you know, the rural view shed and have to have the buffers and the plantings and whatnot, there's certain things that, the community likes. They like to drive by and see pastures and horses and all that, but, you know, we have to be careful with that too, because that, makes a difference.
Well, which brings up another point of discussion we'll have down the road again, is how do you define undisturbed buffer?
Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Kathy, in reading through this, does this apply, are there limitations on number of acres? What, does it apply to every parcel along the roadway? So if I own 1 acre and I've got my 1 acre with my home, does that limit what I can do? Am I automatically in the rural view shed, or is this something, there's minimums and someone's gonna do a development or subdivision, which is, I know when we've talked a lot about this, for I guess preserving, if you're gonna disturb the land, what are we doing in the subdivision? Are there limits differentiating, or is it everybody gets impacted with this?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, but my understanding is it excludes minor subdivisions.
What would be a
Well,
minor
it's
subdivision,
three.
5 or less?
So there's two ways of
Yeah.
looking at it. It applies to everybody, but as far as the notification, so as Kathy goes through the text amendments, we are trying to come up with notification of developments. And so that's where we differentiate between a minor plat and a regular subdivision, which is 3 lots or less is a minor plat, and anything above 3 lots would be a regular subdivision. So everything would apply, and I would concur with the mayor, and I guess the city attorney could agree. I mean, if you just right now own 4 acres, let's say if the mayor owns his property and he has that in perpetuity, and he never improves his property any further, I mean, there's nothing to force him to, I mean, there's a rural view shed, but I think that it's really for future development. So if somebody buys 1 lot, yes, we're gonna, a 2-acre lot to build 1 house, and they're getting ready for the building permit, we're gonna look at it as a rural view shed. But somebody who already has land, I mean, it's good for them to know if they ever change hands or if they wanna subdivide their property, they would have to adhere to it. But the rule is for all properties, but as far as the notification and the further in the text, we talk about a public informational meeting. That only applies to regular subdivisions, anything above 3 lots.
See, I almost, you know, I think this needs to pertain more to a subdivision, say more than 3 lots, because, you know, let's say you have somebody that goes and buys 5 acres and, you know, wants to put a house, you know, obviously have the setbacks and all, but wants to put a house and a barn, you know, we're kind of known for our farms and all that, and wants to have a farm on 5 acres. You know, if we make them plant all kind of plantings and stuff, it's kind of not really gonna, you know, that's
And-
opposite of what our citizens want.
And I think the intent, and that's why we have a review by the arborist, is that, for instance, if you have a pasture and you want to build a barn in front and your house is way back in the back side of this property and you want to build a barn, and even we've had inquiries about doing a riding ring with no structures, obviously. That's a part of the rural view shed. That's why we put in this design process. So it's not that you have to put in a buffer. It's whatever is there, and if it's considered agrarian or rural, we want to try to preserve that, whether it's a field or whether it's a forest, or even the opposite, where you have a farmer or a landowner who has a stable and he wants to be able to clear land for a pasture. I mean, that's why the arborist is brought into it, to help create that pasture. So it's not that you have to put up a screen like the traditional sense of that's why we're changing the terminology, because it was very confusing about an undisturbed buffer. It's not it's not a buffer like we traditionally had thought of. Okay, you're putting a private school and you want to buffer it from the adjacent AG1. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, it's more of a setback, and that's why we came up with the primary and secondary, and that's why they're defined. And then we talk about what can be done within those areas.
And I guess that's where, I know when we first started talking about this, or at least when I was getting involved, we were looking at how are we going to preserve the look and feel of Milton. So if someone wants to come in and they want to build a subdivision where it's really going to be an impact, what protections do we have in place? I'd have a concern if I'm a property owner and I own 1 acre and it happens to be along the roadway, then that means if I wanted to plant my garden or do something, does this prohibit me from doing anything with my property towards the front? That's, I guess, where I'm trying to understand, as written or as we're drafting this, really who is it going to impact? What are we trying to accomplish with this ordinance? And what are the consequences of its impact?
Joe?
Ken, how common is this affidavit mechanism when it comes to titles and land and things like that? In other words, are we gonna set off every alarm bell for every landowner in the city of Milton because yesterday they didn't have to worry about an affidavit and today they do?
You know, it's funny. It is used. It does different things. The reason we're latching upon the affidavit is something to put in the chain of title, and I think candidly, I would rather have it in there if this is our law than not have it in there, and therefore open us up to the argument of how could a bona fide purchaser have knowledge of this requirement when it wasn't in my chain of title.
Oh, no.
So I think if you're looking at sort of which is the worst side of the equation to fall on, I would rather fall on us having tendered it.
No. I am much more in favor of telling people that this is what we're doing to them as opposed to them finding out accidentally.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I'm completely in support of that. What I'm worried about is the idea that an affidavit all of a sudden is some kind of a burden
Cloud on
or a
title.
hindrance
Right.
to somebody making a decision to buy a piece of property in Milton versus someplace else. Now, if it's reasonable to expect that, Joe, affidavits are used all the time and this kind of stuff is, very common, then it's not necessarily going to set off a red flag. But I just know as a person, if I'm trying to make a decision to buy a piece of property and I've got one that seems to be, under some kind of funky set of rules and another that seems to be normal, I think I'm going for normal.
Yeah, I've never seen it done in this particular way where we're literally putting people on notice of a code
Right.
requirement like this.
Okay.
Typically, you see it, for instance, in one jurisdiction I work in, there's soil and sedimentation fines that are not truly in the form of a lien, but an affidavit is a way to put future property owners on notice. So they're used for different things. But I don't find anything I don't think it's going to be viewed as a cloud on title. I don't think it's something that would prevent a closing.
Right.
Might it make individuals inhale or take a gulp when they see it? Sure, it could.
Yeah.
But it's
I just don't want our citizens to think that somehow we're getting in their business, we're taking something away from their ability to do with their property what they want to have done. Now, I would agree, it's a great communication mechanism, make the buyer aware, make the potential property owners aware of what's going on. And I would, like I said, I prefer that, but I just worry about the
it's a fair point.
negative side effects.
In my opinion, and I think this could be simplified. To me, this is what you do for future development and subdivision. So, what I think we should do is have, anything that's a minor subdivision, 3 lots or less, or a quote rural agriculture type property, it doesn't apply to. Now, obviously, the setbacks would and whatnot, but as far as putting a buffer, a planting buffer, or not allowing them to take that down, that wouldn't apply. Then this applies to new construction, which I think all the intent is with new developments, new subdivisions, so that it buffers it and you don't see it. And then after the fact, instead of getting through affidavits and property owners, it would almost be like our tree ordinance, where right now, if somebody wants to come in and cut trees or clear cut or whatever, they have to go through the arborist. Sorry. Whereas if a new developer comes in or a developer and builds a subdivision and he has to follow these rules, he knows about it on the front end, he does that. The people that buy the homes know there's a buffer, they see it, the plantings and whatnot, but then they just need to be aware of that you can't come in there and just clear cut those plantings out. But rather than trying to notify every property owner and get them up in arms and, hey, we're changing this and making this, it's more like, hey, this is what you bought. Just like if you bought a wooded lot right now and you want to go down there and start cutting trees down, you know, our tree ordinance doesn't allow it. So I don't know if we could simplify it to where.
Yeah, well, and if I may, Mr. Mayor, I mean, there's no requirement. This affidavit is not legally required by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, if you want to be very technical about it, all of our citizens are on imputed notice of all the laws of the state of Georgia as
Right.
it is. If you want to be, technical about it, that's true. I think this is just a way of trying to figure out a way, because the rural view, the notion of driving down the road, there ought to be a particular look and feel in this jurisdiction's a little different than what maybe a lot of people may be used to. They typically think of maybe setbacks next to properties and maybe riparian buffers next to streams, but a particular look and feel down a right-of-way corridor, maybe something a little non-traditional we want to put people on notice on. But there's no,
Yeah,
there's no
I want to be careful, and I'll let everybody else speak, but that, you know, we have to be careful with, we want this rural view shed, but what I think the citizens really want is to be able to drive down roads with existing farms and whatnot and see them.
Right.
Versus new subdivisions. Well, we're trying to enact this to kind of soften the blow with the new subdivisions, but you don't want to put rules and stuff in that are going to drive the, quote, rural people that have been here. You don't want to put more restrictions on them that are going to drive them out to where that does become a new
Right.
subdivision.
Yeah.
So,
And that I guess, that's my point where I was trying to ask the question. What are we trying to really, I guess, accomplish by these changes? Let's make sure that if we're going to put a change in ordinance, we're really getting what we want versus making it so broad that it actually grabs along with it someone who we really didn't intend that. I don't want to have unintended consequences. So I want to try to look at it before we ratify anything, really understand what's the impact and really who's it going to impact.
Karen?
Yeah, I understand what we're trying to achieve as far as the subdivisions and that kind of look, but I think we're kind of forgetting that in historical rural Milton, single-family homes were located much closer than 60 feet from the road. In a lot of cases, they were located very close to the road. And I mean, and it was definitely more rural then than it is now. So it's like we're trying to redefine what we want rural to be when it comes to just the single-family residences. You know, clearly with the subdivisions, all the clear cutting and everything, we've got to find a way to keep that from changing what we view now. But you know, we have a lot of houses, historic houses, that are close to the roads, and they were in the rural Milton.
To that point, you notice now it's becoming more and more popular. People wanted to build just one-off homes along the main road. But again, that goes back to what I said earlier. If this is based on these requirements to anything more than a minor subdivision plat, 3 lots or whatever, 5 lots, then it goes to the intent of a new subdivision, and that's what it works on. But then we don't want to go against what the true rural look is. So to me, it should be fairly simple in that. You know, if we could just identify and the intent, if it's everybody's intent, and mine it would be that this is really strictly more for a new subdivision. The developer knows it up front. You know, he's building it, has to do all this, and then the people buy the homes. They know what they're getting. Then you just can't go in and clear cut it or whatever. Matt?
Yeah, I can concur with that. I do have one question though, and obviously I haven't done analysis on the numbers here in the math, the primary and secondary, but is there a estimation by staff that if there was a subdivision that would be under these requirements, obviously they have to do a LDP or land of service permit, or is there going to be a reduction of units with these requirements, or no?
It's hard to say. You know, it's on a case by case, but clearly they will have to mark that off as a rural view shed for not development, and then work within that confines as they do with the stream buffers and our other regulations that we have, our tree ordinance and whatnot.
And obviously, there's some questions and hinting about property rights as well, but just to make sure that we're on the up and up, I'd love to be able to just see, maybe we can examine a few projects that have come in to kind of get an estimation of what those hits might be, if there are any. I mean, it's okay if they're not, or if there are, just so we know what the information is as we make this decision.
Bill?
Couple points. I'd agree that we need to initiate a document such as this out of complete transparency, I think, to the community. Let's get ahead of this ball instead of being behind it. Secondly, I assume you've been involved in similar ordinances like this that increase the setbacks. And I can just anticipate we're going to get into this discussion down the road. What's the issue with a taking?
Yeah, that's a good point, and something the council should think about, because the way this is structured right now, you heard the discussion with respect to variances. I believe right now what this anticipates is that there's going to be basically no variance except possibly one in the secondary setback, and then only in the primary setback if there's in fact basically a failure of the septic system as identified by Fulton County. So our variance allowance is fairly thin on this, and of course the typical wedge against an administrative or regulatory take is the variance process. That's one of the main points of having a variance provision at all, is to allow us on a case-by-case basis to determine if in fact it's negating property rights. Councilman Velusk, I think that's just a situation we would have to address on a case-by-case basis. I mean, property owners, my experience has been, are not shy about letting governments know if they believe that the encroachment onto their property leaves them with basically a non-viable parcel.
I think we need a mechanism in there that through their application, if it's a gross difference, if they're, now, I'm just throwing out numbers, but if it's a 100 lot subdivision and they can get 99 or 98, I don't really see a concern versus, if they could have got 100 with the old rules. But if it's, somebody doing 10 and then all of a sudden they can only get 8, it's it's 20%. So I think we need a mechanism where, and even if it's through administrative, to where if this is actually a gain for the public by having the view shed, that then there's a little give and take on the interior of the neighborhood or backside or whatever, with a buffer or something like that. If that's what it takes so they get the approximate amount, same number of lots, but they're given a better view shed. Robin?
I just want to throw out to remind everybody that already the setback, if you have a double, if you think of a subdivision, and typically they lay it out so you'd have a double frontage. So the setback for the house to the rear is already 60 feet. Now, to be clear, you could, at this point in time, a swimming pool can go 10 feet from a property line. Now, I don't think most people put a swimming pool next to Freemanville Road 10 feet from there. But I mean, just to remember that it's still the same dimension as a regular building setback as this rural view shed. I'm not saying that there couldn't be an effect on it, because you can't put a swing set in it, you can't put a storage shed or a gardening shed, but at least it's not really, we contemplated a larger one, but we felt like that through the discussions that it might be too much, and that's why we were still staying with the total of 60 feet. And the same thing with a one-off, just a lot. When you're speaking of rural view, I mean, right now, any new house has to be 60 feet from the right-of-way. And I know that there's old, traditional, historic houses that are closer, but at least at this point in time, new houses can't be built any closer than 60 feet, So
the main difference would be some of maybe the ancillary improvements you could put in a traditional setback as opposed to the things you simply cannot put in this one.
Correct.
Understood. Okay.
Bill?
Just a quick comment. In further support of giving notice of this title, you mentioned the increased stream buffers, which was a state mandated, whereas we're talking about a city mandated ordinance here. I think just further to the point of transparency, I think we owe it to the public to put them on notice.
So back to Robin, now you're saying the setback would be 60 feet as it stands with this, you couldn't have a lawn within that 60 feet. Your house, your structure could be there, but you'd have to have what's existing now, whether it be pasture or woods, would have to be there.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're looking at just one lot, or you're looking at the subdivision.
Well, I'm just thinking of
Yeah.
a
Right, I mean-
subdivision that goes in and has a road parallel to an
And we're not
exterior
saying that you
road.
couldn't have grass. I think we made a recommendation that to be what type of
It can
grass.
be
It's more
fescue
than
grass, but
fescue,
not
the really
not
manicured.
not manicured.
Right, and then I think we look at, we also included the entrances, because we do have some estates that have large, you know, acreages, and they put up a pretty dramatic entrance. I mean, that would preclude, you know, big stone entrances and, you
But
know,
that's
ornate.
only,
For the
that's
one,
only if we.
yeah, if you pursue just the
if we
single
purs-
family, yeah.
If we pursue this on anything that's a major
Right.
subdivision,
Right.
but not on a minor. And again, I think
Correct,
we
yeah.
just, we need to be careful that we don't drive away the things that really the rural people,
Well, what I
the
kind
rural
of see
people
this
say.
is for subdivisions coming in, you know. as a-
Yeah, that's what
on
I'm
a
saying,
little
new
road-
subdivision.
Well, let me finish. A little road that comes in and then has the road parallel to the main road, where you have houses that are fronting the new road and backing up to the Freeman Mill.
Right.
And it's that kind of thing, not necessarily the house that's gonna go, that went in across from Northwestern Middle School type of thing, that's sitting on the road, that you can't get much more out of it. It's the, what you see when you drive down the road, trying to make it be as like it is today, tomorrow, when the house is sitting.
And I think that's why we have the review, and Mark can speak to that, I mean, we're not gonna say, oh, you can't have a yard in the back. I think we just don't want people getting really fancy and
Yeah, that's the
rural.
direction I felt like we were heading. The mayor was right, and Bert, as far as looking at the subdivisions, because typically that's where you have the rear of the houses or the side of the houses facing your main corridor. We're not necessarily wanting to screen that completely, but at least soften it
Break it
with
up.
natural native vegetation. So that was where I think the rural view shed really is going to have the biggest impact. You get into single family, it's a little more complex. You can drive anywhere in the area, and single family can have a nice landscape yard. It can have no trees. It can be a number of different scenarios there. And the only thing I'm trying to do there is look at it and make it a little congruent with what's already existing around it. Not trying to recreate something, but case in point, the house across the street from the school there. Talking to them, you know, we don't want arborvitaes and nearly wild roses. That's, you know, a very formal landscape. We want to look natural, native material, and that's what they've done. They put native plants there, and so that's what we're trying to do with a single family, is not trying to recreate something, but try to maintain what's there, or at least make it congruent with what's in the immediate area.
And again, I think we're saying the same thing. I just want to make sure we actually capture it when we put it together, because I know that there's some new homes that are being built on new properties, single-family homes, nice yard, looks very pretty as you drive by. I don't think that's what, when we were talking about the rural view shed, we were really trying to address. I think it was more, at least conversations when we were dealing with this last year, was when you're gonna have a subdivision, a major subdivision that's going to impact the whole area, and I've got a wooded street all along, and all of a sudden, boom, houses are right on top. I think that's when we start talking about this, about what's the rural view shed versus the individual homeowner. I've got, 5 acres and I want to have my family each have a home on it, and the driveway's coming off from the main road. I think that's what I would be concerned about, not actually having that damage. I want it to be something where we protect if it's a major thing that's going to change the look and feel of Milton with the subdivision.
And maybe it's as simple as, any new subdivision that's 5 homes or more, or, if their homes are backing up to the road, probably can do something like that.
Is that the direction you'd like us to take for?
I'm okay with that. I would still like to see the example of the impact on some of the rules and what would be compared to what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about, let's say it's a 20 lot subdivision or
Right.
30 or whatever.
Right.
How that impacts, is it going to?
Even if we had an
And
example.
again, I guess that may be a hard one,
Yeah.
because site
Depends on how
specific,
much frontage
depends
they
on
have.
property.
Exactly. Just something to give comparison. I mean, I'm a visual guy, so I just want to kind of see some pictures on that.
So the question was, do we want to try to simplify this to where it's basically geared towards a new subdivision? That way it's not a surprise to anybody, the homeowners or whatever, and that I said 5 lots or less, or minor plat 3 homes or less. If it's just a single family home, it doesn't apply to. If they're building along the street or whatever. Does that sound?
I don't know how we word it, but I like.
But that direction is that
Right, I can
everybody
agree with that.
So we would exempt minor plats, which are 3 homes or less, and single family.
I would change it, so the minor
Okay.
plats, as long as the houses, the backyards did not face the rural view shed. I think you can find a way to do it so that, that's really what we don't want to see, the back of the houses and everything with, and that changing. So if it's 3 homes, a minor plat of 3 homes or less, and at least some of those homes are facing the road as they would have been in historical times, then that's fine. But if I don't want to see it, them doing a minor subdivision and putting all 3 houses backing up to the road.
Okay.
And the reality, that's probably very
Not-
slim, but
yeah,
that's
that's-
a good
yeah,
point.
it's-
If
yeah.
somebody's
Yeah.
gonna put 3 houses, they're probably
They're
gonna.
not gonna do a
Face
road, they're gonna
road,
just
right.
face them to the
They don't
road.
have their own, but,
Yeah.
but it's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, I think there's a good example up there in Birmingham Highway by the Methodist Church. There's a minor subdivision that's gone in there.
Oh, yeah, but I think that's more than 3 lots, though, the piece that's, yeah. Is it just
No, the
3?
one-
The one-
Oh, okay.
The one closer to the church.
Okay.
The one with the 3 homes,
Right.
they're
Okay.
all the same
Yeah.
color, all the same.
So you could even say a side yard or a rear yard,
Right.
because I think maybe one of those might be a side yard.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
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 Okay, shall I continue?
Sure.
I've only got one more page, really. Number 5, it talks about a pre-development notification and public informational meeting, and we have embedded this also into text amendments. Staff proposes that projects that require an LDP be required to hold 1 public informational meeting. These informational meetings would typically include only subdivisions and not minor subdivisions, 3 lots or less, or single parcels. Within 30 days of an applicant submitting a conceptual plan, an informational meeting will be required to occur and will be held at City Hall. Notification of the meeting will be made via mail and a sign on the subject's site. In addition, members of the City Council and Planning Commission shall be notified of the meeting. So the notification process we'll be using will be the same as we use for rezoning applications. So it's that notification project.
So that's like the CZIM type of thing, but trying to formalize it a bit more, is that
Yes,
basically?
yeah,
what
and
that
we'll
is?
have it here, that's right. And we'll invite Planning Commission and members of the City Council. So it's sort of a CZIM, a little enhanced.
So it's within a specific radius of that.
Yes, exactly, which is all defined under the Zoning Procedures Act that the City of Milton uses.
Now, I have a question on that as well, just to make sure I understand. So if there's a notification going out to the public so they know that a project is coming, but currently, right now, AG1 subdivisions, there is no community input. Technically, could there be community input in this process legally, Ken? If we invite people to come and look at it, are they allowed to tell a developer where they would want to put homes? Or is this just basically a goodwill, let you see what's coming, there's nothing you can do about it?
Well, I mean, that's up ultimately to the city council, how you want this process to go. I mean, I think right now, though, this is not anticipating a lot of citizen input on this, is the way I view it. Does the council want to make it that way? I don't know. I mean, this is not in the nature of a zoning, this is more in the nature of a development regulation at this point.
And that's kind of a question on state law as well. Obviously we have this, how do we,
Well, you're going above and beyond.
by
on this.
notifying, right, but
Right.
is there anything with that notification that any
Yeah.
input could be
Yeah.
done by a resident to see this? They just see what's coming, but there's really no input the developer has to receive, as well. The developer can do it as
Well, that's
per
always-
laws
right.
that we make,
Well,
right?
But I think, to your point, though, this is taking what was previously already legally allowed and enhancing it, plus the fact you're letting the public know.
exactly. But as far as how
It's not
much.
like you're taking lots and making them smaller, or, changing something.
Right, but I'm not seeing anything within this proposed draft that anticipates let's see what you all want this to look like, and we'll, modify the development to make it look that way. I'm not seeing that.
Right, but that's not really what those meetings are about. Those meetings are about communication, okay? Now, it's nice to think that people are open to ideas and are seeking input, and indeed some of them are. But in this particular case, and one of the reasons I would say I don't know that we gotta exclude anything in terms of having these meetings, because I think, more is more in this particular case. It's not less is more, it's more is more. And I see this all about communication, and we want to keep our citizenry informed of exactly what's going on. If we've gotten any feedback in the last 6 months, it's that we don't communicate enough. So here we have an opportunity to communicate more. I think that makes sense.
And if I might add, the fact that the developer will be here as well, and he can hear the feedback from the community.
Right.
And there's not to say that he won't make some changes based on that feedback, but again, it is just structured to be an informational meeting at this point.
Right.
And obviously, since it is informational, if the developer were proposing to do something that was drastically not within the norm or whatever, we would definitely, and the public was available to look at it, we definitely would hear about it.
Yeah, and he might, think twice before he does it.
Yeah, it's smart business.
Okay, I'll proceed. Section 6 deals with the definitions. Staff has proposed several new definitions as recommended by the Planning Commission. One of the most important ones is for rural viewshed, and we'll cover that when we get into the actual text amendment. In terms of
Kathy,
yes, sir.
we make a lot of use of the term rural in general, not in association with viewshed, but just rural all by itself. I mean, in the front of this document, I can probably count 8 places where we use the term rural, not attached to viewshed. Are we going to try to define that? Is that already defined in our definition section?
Well, we do have a definition for rural viewshed. Whether we call it a viewshed or not, or something else, we can certainly change.
No, I'm just talking about the word rural.
What does that mean?
What does it mean to be rural?
I've got some pictures.
No. I guarantee you this is one of those things.
It does,
It
right.
means something different to everybody, and we use it as if it was some well-known, well-defined term, and it's really not.
I said earlier, a while back, to me it's an oxymoron where we want to have a rural-looking subdivision entrance.
Right, exactly.
To me,
Yeah, if
to
you
me,
go to
rural,
South Georgia and tell them we're working on a rural view shed, they would laugh at you.
to me, rural is a gravel road and a barbed wire fence and some cows out there.
Well, I think as we continue to build out the city, we become less rural.
Right.
We become more urbanized than rural. So I think it's a good idea to define the term rural.
I've already gone over the tipping point of rural.
Well, no, and I'm not trying to be funny. I'm trying to be quasi-serious, because if we're going to use that term, I mean, let's face it, it's in our mission and our vision statements. The rural heritage. What do we mean by that? So it would be great for us to grab hold of whatever might remain of the term rural when it comes to Milton and actually put something on paper related to
I mean, the good news, I think these changes we're talking about, whether it's plantings and buffers and setbacks and, the entrances less grandiose, the 4-board fence, things like that kind of mimic, even though it's more of a modern rural, if you want to call it. I don't know if that's a rural-esque, but, I think it's more, in my mind, it's more, and to Bill's point, it's continually changing, but as long as we can be continually changing less than all the areas around us, we'll still feel a little more rural.
Maintain some of the characteristics.
Yeah. And again, to the same thing, which I think we're on the right path with some of these, you see people building these farmhouses along the road. I mean, it does give it a rural feel. So.
But they all have inside bathroom facilities instead of an outhouse, right?
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, I know what you're saying.
They're all on septic systems.
Okay.
Okay, moving on, just a couple more here. So we do have a section on definitions, as I mentioned. Number 7 is violations and penalties. We thought there should be some penalties built in if the rural view shed gets disturbed. So we proposed the following language. For any disturbance of the rural view shed before the appropriate approvals are issued, the property shall be barred from being developed for 3 years and shall restore the land to its original landscape, or if applicable, with appropriate tree recompense as determined by the city arborist. So.
Can I just make a statement?
Yes, sir.
To me, if we're going more in the direction where this is pertaining to a subdivision, once it's done and the home's built and the buffer's there, it's not gonna be developed, the home's already there. So I don't know if that even is, pertains to it at this point.
Are you talking about code enforcement or catching it in the process?
No, I mean, we would have to, code enforcement, it's just like now, if somebody came and cut down a tree in the middle of the night. But it's not, whereas this is stated, if we change it to how everybody agreed, that this is for, over minor plats and
Right,
for
right,
subdivision,
yes, and
then this is really a moot point here. It's,
Yes,
if
yes, I
somebody
understand what you're saying.
buys
yes.
a home in a neighborhood and it's got the view shed and they go out there and trim some of the stuff, that's gonna be up to the arborist to come back and make them replant it, but it's not gonna put up things, say, hey, you can't develop this property for 3 years, and they're like, well, my house is only 2 years old, why would I?
Yeah,
Tear it
I
down,
see what you're
don't
saying. We took the tactic of.
If it were everything.
The clear cutting problem that we had, and so we put a penalty in place. But I see what you're saying, is how would you know ahead of time that it was going to be developed for a subdivision and therefore come under the rural view shed requirements, is I think what you're saying.
Well, I think the first 3 words in there, for any disturbance, that's kind of non-specific. Does it mean 1 tree, or does it mean 100 trees?
Right.
Scrubby pines.
Scrubby pines.
Well, and that's, see it too, as I take it, is, blah, 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 before the appropriate approvals are issued. So say we've got a land disturbance permit that's issued, and there was no encroachment, there shouldn't be any encroachment, because there's no septic tanks to fail yet, and they get into the tree, or this 60-foot primary and secondary buffer for whatever reason, then can you put a stop work order on there that lasts for 3 years? That's where the penalty, that's where you gotta get it. Not that, whoops, we're sorry, we laid it out wrong. Is that something you can do?
Well, I mean, maybe. I mean, I view this more the way the clear-cutting prohibitions of the tree code read. I think that was kind of how this was styled, which was meant to basically prevent people from going out and clear-cutting and coming in and saying, now I want to develop my property. So maybe it's not apples. It may be apples and oranges if we're not even going the way we originally thought we were going. If this is only going to apply to subdivisions of 4 units or more. I mean, typically, if somebody violates our code, we have the typical code enforcement route we could impose against them. We can have the arborist require replantings. We can do that. We can seek injunctive relief against them. But I agree with you. I don't know that a 3-year stop work makes a whole lot of sense.
But I think, keep in mind, that this
I think
is,
it does make sense, but I don't know if you can enforce it.
well,
Right.
but keep in mind, this is going to be pertaining to a new subdivision, so the builder and the developer is obviously gonna be aware of it, and it's on the plans as he's building it. So unless he's just an idiot, he's not gonna go clear some of that. I mean, he might, but again, you could hold the CO up if they don't replant it, too.
But this
So-
could also come into account if somebody planted, if we don't change it and it was single family, if somebody went in and planted a row of, giant green arborvitaes all along the back of the property lawn, they've disturbed the rural view shed. And how do you enforce that? I mean, I guess you can make them go dig them back up, but then,
I guess the good news is probably 99% of the time, if you have a subdivision developed and people are living in it, buy the new home and they live in it, and there's this buffer between the main road and the back of their house, 99% of the time, those folks probably are gonna go out there and start cutting it, because they're gonna, it's a good thing to have that buffer.
I see it more in the initial development phase than
That's what it's
moving, new people move in.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
but
If
like
we're
I said,
just
if they
talking
came
about
in, if they
somebody-
moved in and started doing a whole bunch of plantings that were not the right kind of plantings, they could be disturbing the, and I don't know how a 3-year bar would, that doesn't make sense in that
At
case.
that point, they've already,
They're already in.
it's done, but-
get them to replant. But
Yeah, I think it would fall under code enforcement at
I
that
think
point.
it's, it's almost like, I mean, you can't come up with a law that's gonna fit 100% of the times and, and everybody's gonna follow it. There's gonna be a small percentage of the time that somebody's gonna do something, and it's gonna be up to code enforcement to deal with it and make them recompense or, replant, just like if somebody came in and cut trees down they weren't supposed to.
Wasn't part of this too, like you said, when we were looking at subdivisions and the concern with someone who comes in and does a big portion of like clear cutting, or just wipes out, says, oops, you know what, I took down the specimen trees and, well, I'll pay the recompense, whatever that is. So he just made his life, he or she made their life really easy. They got what they wanted, and they'll say, okay, Mark, I'll give you a check for this. And I know we talked about also beefing up the tree ordinance, looking at where we could put a little bit more teeth into it. But is this what we're trying to get at actually, is to avoid that? Is that what this portion is?
Well, if the penalty portion was to avoid having any of that happen. But that does segue into the very last section, which is the tree ordinance. And that a lot of this would also fall within the tree ordinance. And through the city manager, we have been directed to look at the tree ordinance, and we've started that, and we've really concluded that we really need to write a new one, again, to protect not only the rural view shed, but the tree canopy of the city and specimen trees and whatnot. So we are going to look at a more stringent tree ordinance that will save the trees not only in the rural view shed, but clearly on the rest of the land, and as each parcel gets developed, how we can better control those trees that are taken down.
But it is about strengthening exactly what you just
Yes.
said. So the whoops is not beneficial.
The whoops is a little bit
Yeah.
more painful, because
Yeah.
many times oh, I'm sorry, it was intentional, and they knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't an accident.
But that's really what that's geared towards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bill?
Beat a dead horse here. Those first three words, or flog a deceased equine, as the case may be. In any contract or any point of law, I guess it's the little words that usually get you in trouble. And we rely on interpretation, I guess, of our laws here. We rely on common sense, but I think those first three words are open to interpretation. Somehow, if we could refine that, set some limits anyways. If the surveyor goes in that property before development permit's issued and he's cutting a line through there, does that constitute a violation?
And again, we gotta have some common sense for what the big picture is. I mean, we've had instances where somebody's bought property, built beautiful home way back, nice barns, put the fences up, pastures and all that, and all of a sudden they got a, little strip of saplings and scrub stuff that looks awful and couldn't get rid of it versus, hey, the public wants to drive down that road and see the beautiful farm and the land and the horses and all, so. Okay.
Okay, that is basically my memo, and I'd now like to move on to the actual zoning text, and I'm going to use the AG1, although all the other single-family zoning districts are the same. So I'm just going to start with this one, and just move through it in essence. We really start with page 3 of the AG1, and under subsection J, we talk about the entrances of the right-of-way, and you have seen this language before, and it went to the Planning Commission and basically remained unchanged. And essentially, we're trying to create I'm using the word rural, but maybe I can use simple and rustic in design. And it goes on to define the signage and the walls and the location of the gate structure, and that no water features are permitted. And again, the idea is to make it a very simple type of entrance, a la, as I've said before, a Six Hills type entrance. Under subsection K, rural view shed, this is where we get into the, what the rural view shed is. Number one, it provides a 40-foot primary setback from all proposed Milton Trail or sidewalk easements or proposed right-of-way, whichever is more restrictive, along the exterior streets. No disturbance within the 40-foot primary setback shall be allowed until a design review process is completed and the design of the rural view shed is approved by the city arborist. Driveways accessing exterior streets shall be prohibited except where they cross the rural view shed in a perpendicular manner. Individual septic systems may be installed in the primary setback with an improved primary variance if the primary and secondary septic fields fail, and the property may be condemned by the health department without such a variance. Subsection 2 deals with the secondary setback. It says provide a 20-foot secondary setback from the primary setback for buildings, accessory structures, and swimming pools for lots adjacent to exterior streets. Individual septic systems may be installed in the secondary setback with an improved primary variance. B, driveways accessing exterior streets shall be prohibited within the 20-foot secondary setback except where they cross in a perpendicular manner. No disturbance within the 20-foot secondary setback shall be allowed until a design review process is completed and the design of the rural view shed is approved by the city arborist. Then we list the criteria that may be used by the city arborist when performing a design review of the primary and secondary setbacks, and they include evaluation of current state of vegetation, screening of the structures, and C, existence of pastoral or agricultural operations in the area. For structures located on lots subject to a rural view shed, architectural elevation shall be reviewed and approved by the city architect prior to the issuance of a building permit. 5, after issuance of the necessary permits to disturb the property, but before the required pre-construction meeting, the developer shall install a 4-foot-high orange tree-safe fence, at least at the combined primary and secondary setback. The fence shall be installed so as to protect heritage trees, protected trees, and specimen trees. Location of such fencing shall be approved by the city arborist. And there will be a sign posted as well, every 25 feet, indicating rural view shed. Notwithstanding any of the contrary, agricultural operations may occur in the primary and secondary setbacks. Prior to the transfer of any legal interest in an AG1 zone parcel that is subject to a rural view shed, every legal or beneficial owner of such a parcel shall ensure that there is recorded in the chain of title for the parcel an affidavit stating the following. And this is language that we reviewed in the memo in terms of what that should say. It says, at the time of the execution of this affidavit, the property with respect to which this affidavit is filed is subject to certain restrictions contained in the City of Milton zoning ordinance located in Chapter 64 of the Code of Ordinances. Such restrictions may include restrictions on development and disturbance of property located in the rural view shed, which includes portions of property adjacent to streets not located within a platted subdivision. In addition, a copy of the affidavit must be provided to any transferee of a legal interest in the parcel no later than the final closing of the transfer. I'm moving on to page 5, and we talk about the pre-development notification and public.
Yeah.
I'm
I have
sorry.
one question.
Yes.
When we're saying a sign has got to be posted on the fence every 25 feet indicating rural view shed,
Is that just a little small?
Yes.
Right, yeah,
Yes.
it's for the construction, kind of like.
just for the
Teresa said.
construction
Yeah.
period. I mean, I'm
It's like a
thinking,
Teresa.
you know, we don't
Yeah.
need signs every 25 feet.
Right. It's sign litter. We
Yeah.
agree. And this is just really for the construction of this.
Don't want to violate our sign ordinance.
Everybody else does.
Okay, I'm on page 5, if I can move along, and this is the pre-development notification and public informational meeting, and this sort of mirrors what we talked about previously about we'll be using the zoning procedures as same rules that we used to notify for rezonings we'll be using here. There'll be an informal meeting, we'll be mailing notices out, there'll be a sign posted stating that there will be a meeting held. Members of the City Council and the Planning Commission will be invited to attend as well. On the page 6, we deal with definitions, and we have included several definitions that were not included before, including agricultural operations, and that is a definition we took out of the state. So it's rather long but very inclusive. We have come up with definitions for construction, for developer, development area, lot, owner, and then on page 7 rather, we've also included definitions for parcel, conceptual plan, and rural view shed. And the rural view shed, again, as we've defined it, has a primary setback, which is the first 40 feet, and then there's a secondary, which is contiguous to the primary, and which is the second 20 feet. We also included definitions for site, tract, and then the very last one deals with the violations and penalties. Same language that we talked about. For any disturbance of the rural view shed before the appropriate approvals are issued, the property shall be barred from being developed for 3 years and shall restore the land to its original landscape, or if applicable, with appropriate tree recompense as determined by the city arborist. So those are the changes to the to RZ 15-18 through RZ 15-23. Are there any questions? Yes.
And maybe this is in another place, but one of the things we talked about was the lack of notification of people being aware when a subdivision is going to go in. I notice here this is really about non-resident plan prior, okay, for residential use or land disturbance for non. So this would encompass then any type of subdivisions in the future. This
Yes.
addresses that concern.
Certainly, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we added that, or land disturbance permit for non-residential uses, because you could have a church coming
Sure.
in,
Right.
and they don't do a conceptual plan, they do a land disturbance permit.
So this would allow just like with the rezoning, the notices to surrounding
Right.
people as well
Correct.
as a public notice so they can come to the
And I'm sorry,
informational meeting.
not for a church, but for a kennel. A kennel is a by right use, and we had a lot of,
Okay.
discussions when the
Right.
one at Francis and
Yep.
Hopewell came
Yeah.
in, and
Yeah.
so that would kind of help alleviate some of that
Okay.
concern.
I like the idea of doing it for residential too, because that's.
Oh, yeah, that was the
Oh, yeah,
primary
that's,
reason.
that's,
Yes.
that's the driving
Yeah.
point here, yes,
Okay.
It's
yes,
a provision that came out of the conservation
Right.
subdivision.
right, yes, precisely. If there are no more questions, I'd like to move on to RZ 15-24, which is one up from the end of your packet, which is essentially deals with the rural Milton overlay. And we've made just a couple of changes to that. Number one, the first modification is that we have deleted the reference to the rural view shed because we've now placed it in each of the individual zoning districts, so it need not reside in this section. In addition, since we had it open, we took the opportunity to add more language dealing with stormwater facilities. We really want to now move toward a more organic bioswale type of stormwater facility as opposed to the old wall type stormwater facilities, and we really needed some more teeth in our language in order to do that. So we have added some language to subsections B3 that now reads, stormwater better site designs and non-structural stormwater management practices shall be required unless allowed by the Director of Public Works. So there is an out, and certainly on a case-by-case if there was extenuating circumstances, but our goal is to move toward a more garden-like, organic-shaped type of stormwater facility to make it an amenity to a development as opposed to putting it in the back and having it look rather unattractive. So that's what that's all about. And then the very last, which is Chapter 50, relates to Chapter 50 subdivisions and creating Section 50-162 rural design, which is number 7 on the agenda. We would recommend that this be withdrawn because this was our first attempt to put this whole rural view shed into the subdivision ordinance. And as I said at the very beginning of the memo, our city attorney recommended that we take it out of the subdivision ordinance where we had put it and put it into those individual zoning districts. Because we had advertised it, it needs to be addressed and action taken on it. So we would recommend withdrawal since we are not using that as the vehicle for these rural view shed changes anymore.
we go
Yes.
back one
Yes.
on this area where it was fencing and height, and we changed it to retaining walls? RZ 15-24, at the very end. Where we've changed it, we just have the number 1, where it says retaining walls above 3 feet high shall have a continuous planting of evergreens. Can we just add as approved by the city arborist to that, so that we don't end up with just one long row of
Yep.
cryptomeria or something there that just looks like a landscape fence?
No problem, we got that.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify something back with the main part when we talked about subdivision, about entrances. We changed it to apply to even single family, so if you all, it sounds like you wanna just deal with subdivisions, so we would need to change that entrance to subdivision entrances instead of all entrances.
Okay.
Is that, I just wanna make sure when we come back with any changes, cause right now it reads as though if you had an estate lot of 10 or 5 acres and you wanted to put in this really dramatic, entrance, that you couldn't do that, so you wanna give them that option?
Well, I mean, a lot of their state lots have fences with gates and everything going in, and I don't know how you, if you're getting rid of all of that, I think you're probably losing some people that would like to move to the city, but yet feel like they need to have a fence around their property.
It's not that they can't have a fence, I guess it's just, as, you know, sometimes some of these single lots have pretty sophisticated entrances, so.
Aren't we eliminating that from this?
Right, I'm just
Yeah.
confirming that,
Okay.
yes. So I'm just making sure that if something pops up that's dramatic,
yes,
that you'll know why.
If somebody wants to.
Put a water fountain in front.
No, if someone wants to buy a big parcel and put a big McMansion back there and have a fancy fence, I'd personally rather see that than 20 homes.
Oh, right, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah, for clarity, I just wanted clarity on that, and what's that particular, prospective builder that's gonna build on Thompson Road, very natural along that area. I think he has about a 7-acre lot. He's gonna build a pretty nice house, talking about the stone, gated entrance, manicured lawn, totally not in keeping with anything in the immediate area. But that's something that we wanna accept, correct?
Well, that's kind of going back,
Yes,
if we're.
yeah,
you know,
I think that's where the
eliminating-
consensus of the council
Okay.
is, Mark, that we are gonna exclude single-family and minor subdivisions.
Council okay with
Okay.
that?
Yeah.
There's a line, I think, on what you can tell everybody to do with the property.
Well, yeah. The more you tell them, the better. Throw the baby out with the bathwater. Bill?
Back in detention ponds, if we're leaning towards bioswales, so I would assume we would be eliminating any type of protective fencing around them.
Well, I think what Kathy meant by that is we're leaning towards the more organic visual aesthetic of it, not necessarily specifically bioswales. You would still be allowed to do those types of stormwater management facilities that are outlined in the design guidelines of the Stormwater Management Manual. What we're trying to prevent is the four-walled hole in the ground. And if you've got to do walls to accomplish something like that, it would at least give us the opportunity to make those walls, either step those walls or curve those walls or do something that makes that facility more of an amenity within the subdivision or development than some of the ones that we're seeing now. So I don't think it was necessarily specific to a bioswale, but more of that aesthetic value. Although a bioswale is an approved measure.
Right, but in cases where bioswales or some other type of modified form of detention is used, you would tend to eliminate any type of fencing around them, just to
Right.
enhance the
Right.
appearance of it.
That's correct.
How would you handle that in this format? Is it just an administrative variance?
It is, and so it relates more to the specific development of each individual facility. So where walls may exist that could create a hazard or require fencing on the top from a safety perspective,
Right.
Obviously they would be there. Where we've got water and steep side slopes on us, 2-to-1 maybe even 3-to-1 side slopes. It may require fencing. So it would vary from facility to facility, but the goal would be to design them and construct them in such a manner that fencing would not be required. I think most places generally say, if your side slopes, even if you've got a permanent pool of water, are flatter than 4-to-1, that fencing's not required. So that would be our general standard that we would look at.
To try to get our volume more out of area and the depth as possible too.
That's right. The shallower the facility, obviously, the better, but that requires a lot more area. But the stormwater manual goes through a number of different design criteria and standards that would be permittable for us.
Okay, good.
That's it? That's all?
Can you put that first one up?
Now cards on that.
3 hours to go.
It's the same thickness as Kathy's, so you got it.
See if you can be more
No Brad
efficient.
here, too.
Well, that concludes my presentation for this evening.
I second it.
You want to report?
So what I was going to go through were some proposed changes to Chapter 48. There's a number of administrative changes and clerical changes and efficiency things that we've done throughout the ordinance, and I'm going to try and skip those unless you have any specific questions on those. In a lot of cases, we've updated tables and criteria to match current standards in the Georgia DOT driveway manual. So you'll see a lot of the tables have been updated to reflect that. What I'd like to talk about primarily are the 4 main issues here: the entrance requirements, auxiliary turn lanes, which would be your decel lane and left turn lanes, the use of gravel roads, and the sidewalks and trails. So under the current ordinance, a typical subdivision is set up to provide a decel lane, sometimes a left turn lane, curb and gutter across the entire frontage into the interior of the subdivision. And here's a couple of pictures of what is required under the current ordinance in relation to the main road and curb and gutter, and some of the modifications that we wanted to do to get to a more rural, or at least promote a more rural type section. So one of the things that we've looked at is we've added some entrance details associated with a subdivision. This would be a residential subdivision entrance. We've added some detail that talks about not only a subdivision that may have curb and gutter internal, but a subdivision that may want to have a more rural typical section internal to the subdivision, and then how that ties into our roads. So this detail basically talks about tying in a internal road with no curb and gutter, a more rural typical section internal to the subdivision, onto a external road that has no curb and gutter. And so what we've found is, and what we're trying to protect against, is in some cases you can do a very good job giving some positive guidance around the radius. And so in this case, the positive guidance is a vertical curb and gutter, and stops short of through travel lane like our detail shows. In some cases, you don't have any positive guidance and the radiuses look great. We don't have any problem. I cannot tell you why people don't run off the road here, and they do in other cases, but they don't. May have something to do with the number of lots and the volume of traffic that's coming in, but what we see more typically in areas where we've got a radius and no curb and gutter, no positive guidance in that area, is vehicles, particularly larger vehicles and trailers, running off the road, rutting the side of the road, and in some cases producing a hazard along the side of the road where we've got drop-offs along the edge. So in our typical detail, what we have tried to do is provide, and as we move forward with this, we'll work this out a little bit more, but and this is a 2-foot concrete band in that particular area. It may be a vertical curb, but it's going to be some sort of positive guidance around that radius to protect that edge.
Is it a ribbon type curve at grade, or is that one has a little bit?
It's a little bit of a vertical. It is.
Because we need something that's going to give us shoulder, edge protection.
Right,
Start
right.
traveling everywhere.
We've talked about just a flat ribbon, but we're concerned that that won't provide enough guidance. What we found in other locations is the more room we give them to make the turn, the more they take, and they keep running off. So, you know, Bob's talked about maybe some granite boulders or something in the concrete to give it some texture and some feel, some tactile feel when you run on it. So we'll continue to work on that detail as we work our way through the process. Even a vertical curb, and I mean, any feedback that you all may have on preferences of that vertical curb in some of those areas, I think can still maintain a rural look and still provide the positive guidance and edge protection. Sorry, I shouldn't be saying the rural look.
It's a rural curb.
The look and feel that we're hoping to achieve.
You ask some of the old farmers,
Right.
what kind of curb do you have to keep it rural?
So I think we ought to extend whatever it is out, you know, even if it's got some elevation change to it. And as we come on out to our right of way, you know, maybe wrap it just for shoulder protection, you know, the edge of pavement protection. We can always, you know, fix the grass.
Yep.
But just where we're not having to deal with, you know, rattling pavement at the edge.
Yeah, we do like to end it a little bit before you get to the travel lane. You can continue it on, and I think if you continue it on, we probably go further than what we want, and we may be back to where we are now.
But even if we put it as a ribbon, you know, at
Right,
asphalt
right.
elevation, just for a nice, I like square edges.
I think what we've found is the further you get out towards the lane, the more opportunity you have for someone to leave the lane and hop up on it.
I mean, I'm talking
And
about that grade,
overcorrect.
you know, ribbon at grade, and it could
Yeah.
even be black concrete, you know, where
You know, we've debated that in-house too. How far do you bring those edges around to where you have begun the positive guidance and kept people off of the edge? So that's certainly something we'll look at as we go forward.
you know, do a
Yeah.
little, you know, mountable curve.
Carter,
Yes, sir.
at Birmingham Road, Hopewell Road intersection, a few months ago, we talked about the edge treatment around that, outside of the perimeter of the roundabout. We talked about maybe investigating what the National Park Service uses. Have you found any alternatives in their road designs?
We did look at some of the parks guidance and actually pulled some numbers from that later in this ordinance on gravel roads. And I didn't find any specific guidance. We had talked about granite curb and some curb alternatives that we ultimately shied away from on the roundabout. But other than curb and gutter and curbing, I haven't been able to put my hands on anything specific from the Park Service that they like a granite curb or vertical curb or anything like that.
They do use timber in some of the more remote areas.
Timber, right.
Maybe it was.
The rural areas.
They did provide some guidance on some criteria at which point curb and gutter would, or some sort of edge protection would be required, but didn't necessarily provide any specific details on the document that we were looking at.
Well, have you considered a rolled curb like you would on the perimeter of the roundabout?
And I'll show you some of that as we get a little bit further in. Yes, we have.
Well, the look is very important, but safety is very, very important.
Right.
So we've got to, we can't compromise safety, unfortunately, just for the look.
Maybe even a stamped concrete,
Yeah.
mountable type curve.
Could be,
You know, that
right.
that would kind of yield the look of something natural, but.
Like stone, but it's really concrete.
Yeah, we're trying to find that mix between those elements that may provide a very nice aesthetic value, but also would be something that we can maintain in the future if we need to. Most of this is going to be within the right-of-way and would require us to come back in the future. So all of those certainly are
Well,
possibilities.
If our detail and, you know, our specifics, design criteria are over the top, like the DOT has on some things.
Yeah.
That would mean that we wouldn't have to come back to it for a while,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, that's right. So the other situation we were looking at is probably more typical from what we've seen here recently, and that's a subdivision that has curb and gutter internal to the development and no curb and gutter external. And so we've added some detail. This actually does come from Georgia DOT, so we've added some detail on how that entrance would look and tie into a non-curb and gutter external street. Obviously, if it's a curb and guttered external street, it would just tie in as we have typically seen. And here's some pictures on some variations on that, just to give you an idea about what that would look like with internal curb and gutter. That actually is I think that's a rolled curb and gutter, if that's not there at the entrance. This is an example of both types of entrances right there together. So on the left you have more of the traditional standard vertical curb and gutter entrance, wrapping all the way around the decel lane, and in this case it's got a XL lane. And then on the right-hand side you have a subdivision entrance with a rollback curb and gutter that's a little bit difficult to see in the shadows there, but it is a rolled curb and gutter that comes down to a typical section on the main street that has no curb and gutter. So just to give you some visual idea about what these various entrances look like. The handout that you have in your packet tonight shows the proposed ordinance with the engineering recommendations there in red and underlined, legal's recommendations in blue and underlined. And then what I'd like to do as I go through the presentation tonight, I'll highlight those comments that the Planning Commission may have had to give you an idea about that. And then in the final version that you would see for the second reading, it will incorporate any comments that we have tonight plus those Planning Commission comments. A lot of those were kind of grammatical comments, and I won't go over those tonight, but where they had substantial comments on the substance of the ordinance, I will highlight those for you.
I believe ours are just in black and white, so I don't think.
Oh,
they're
they are?
red and blue.
Oh.
What page are you?
Yeah, where are you?
Oh, I haven't gotten to any yet. I'm going to work my way back to page 27, which is goes over the auxiliary turn lanes.
Yep, it's black and white.
Everything's black and white.
I got red.
Then in the black and white version, the legal comments would be italicized. There's not a whole lot. Most of them are engineering type comments.
I didn't think a Georgia Tech gal would want to see something in red and black.
Red and blue is okay.
So for the auxiliary lanes, this is going to be right turn and left turn lanes that we've had a lot of discussion on in the past. And what we've done is we've modified section 48-416, which is on page 20, hopefully is on page 27 of your handout there. And that starts off, this is a little bit of the discussion of the entrance to that, except where necessary, we're going to not recommend the use of barrier curbs on the external roadways. So that takes out the traditional curb and gutter along the entire frontage of a subdivision as we've typically seen, and then ties back to the two details that we just talked about.
And Carter, what would be an example of necessary, just except where necessary?
So there may be times where curb and gutter is going to be necessary to handle specific drainage issues. When we start talking about sidewalks, the location of the sidewalk, we can get a lot closer to the road with the use of curb and gutter. We can change our grading if we need to protect slopes or trees, or where we see that there may be a positive benefit for the installation of the curb, then that's where it would be considered.
Can that be you make that final decision, or?
We would make that in Public Works.
Gotcha.
So then on the following page, on page 28, are the tables that we've changed. And I'll just talk about this table, but the right turn and left turn tables are very similar. And what we've done in the past is that if you met either the criteria on the main line road for daily traffic, so in this particular case, over 40 miles an hour if the mainline traffic was more than 4,000 vehicles per day, or you had a daily right turn volume of 75 vehicles or a peak hour volume of 7 vehicles. Any of those criteria could require a left or a right turn lane. And in a lot of cases, the turn volumes into the subdivision weren't what was triggering it. It was the volume on the main line road. So what we've done is we've actually gone back to a modified version of the GDOT table and based it primarily on your turn volumes into your subdivision. And so that criteria looks at roads over and under 6,000 vehicles per day. And if you look at this exhibit would give you an idea about where those roads exist. So the roads in blue, which are, no surprise, it's our Freemanvilles and Hopewells and Cogburns. Those all have more than 6,000 vehicles per day. That would trigger turn lanes at a lower right turn and left turn volume than the other roads. So while it doesn't eliminate the left turn and right turn lanes, it will minimize it over what we've seen in the past under previous criteria, and still be in an area that we think, from an operations standpoint, is safe and effective. What this also goes on to say is that even if you aren't required to install them, you are required to dedicate the right-of-way necessary for the installation of right and left turn lanes, so that in the future, if it's determined from an operational or safety standpoint that the installation is necessary, we'll have the right-of-way already dedicated to do that installation. Most of the rest of this was just a cleanup of tables and signs, so let me get back to page 58 for gravel roads. So in this case, the discussion revolved around gravel roads and our ability to approve new developments with existing gravel roads. Under the way the current ordinance is worded, it says, and I'm looking at line 21, section 6 here, that proposed private unpaved gravel roads shall be exceptional and agricultural in nature. And we had proposed some modifications to that to basically change the agricultural to residential, and that if they were going to be private, they had to meet certain criteria. Where the ADT was less than 400 vehicles per day, because that's really getting to a point where the gravel road sees significant deterioration much faster than what we would want. That gravel road should not connect one or more higher classifications of roads. In other words, since it was going to be a private road, we didn't want the opportunity for the general public to use it from one road to another, like a Nix or a Wood. That would increase the types and volumes of traffic on that private road, and therefore create probably more of a maintenance issue for the homeowners on that road than what we would probably want them to have. And then just like on our typical design standards where a private road is to be constructed to public road standards, we would develop some gravel road standards that they would have to abide by in the development of that road. I will say the Planning Commission did not like B. They did not want to eliminate the possibility of the road connecting to other roads. I think they wanted to try and promote the use of the gravel roads in any opportunity that they could. And
I
they
don't see why somebody would want to build a gravel road that's private that is public.
They also
Because it's not gated, private doesn't mean gated.
right.
I mean, they're not, they can, but it doesn't.
They also wanted us to seriously consider allowing them to be public.
I think that's a
Build
mistake.
a public dirt road.
Mhm. So we've got 13 miles of current gravel roads
Right.
throughout the city.
How much does it cost us to upkeep a gravel road per mile per year?
We spend about $100,000 per year on those 13 miles, and a lot of that depends on dust control. Dust control runs us about $38,000 per application. We budget for 2. We try to only do 1. So
$8,000 a month.
And how much
38,000
does
for
a-
13
for the
miles.
all 13
Yeah.
miles per.
How much does a paved road cost us per year? Obviously, we repave once every 10 years.
Like a third.
Yeah.
About a third of it.
And we have an annual budget of about $2 million for the paved roads.
Or how many miles of paved roads?
We have 165 miles, including residential streets. Breaks down to about 60 miles of centerline miles of your arterials and collectors, and 100 miles of residential.
So let me be clear on this section here. Are you saying that the only new gravel roads to be allowed would be private roads?
That's correct.
So where does the road design come in? If these are private roads, then you're talking about the city developing design standards?
That's
for
right.
Private roads?
That's right. So just as the code currently says, if you were to build a private subdivision road, you have to build that road to public standards.
Right.
It would be the same thing for a gravel road.
Okay.
So essentially what we would be saying is if you're going to do a private gravel road, this is beyond a driveway, then you've got to build it to certain standards so that we can ensure the residents who are moving in there are at least getting a quality product on the front end.
Sure.
How they choose to maintain it from that point on would be up to them. And we also want to make sure that it meets safety standards so we can get emergency equipment into the.
One thing we did 7-8 years ago was to address the transition from gravel to a paved road.
Yes.
And putting a strip of asphalt in there, depending on the conditions, the slope of the road and all. May want to address that.
Should probably be very well included in our standard detail, that's right.
I don't feel we need to offer any public gravel roads, in my opinion.
You're talking about new ones.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've kept the ones because they've got I hate to
Rural.
say
Yeah,
rural.
kind of like rural,
but-
aren't they? Yeah.
But it actually is
Exactly.
more country. But like you said, Carter, as long as the volume is low enough, you're not going to see all the washboarding or the roads destroyed.
Right, and there would be some limitations in our design guidelines about slopes and where we thought they were appropriate. So they would not necessarily be permitted everywhere, even under a private classification.
The Planning Commission didn't say they wanted to see new dirt roads put in for public roads.
They did. They liked the idea of that type of development and promoting.
Development, but not like a main road thoroughfare, or is it more for just a?
Well, I think everybody envisions that it would be a larger lot type subdivision, maybe a smaller number of homes, and you could certainly develop that type of threshold that it would only be permitted under certain development standards. We don't have full-time maintenance crews. We bring in our maintenance crews. They're part-timers, and we rent equipment to do this, and so we maintain them on a regular cycle 3 times a year. So if we develop a larger network of gravel roads that we've got to address issues immediately, we don't have that capability in-house right now.
I think it's great in theory that, we have gravel roads, they're public roads, but it doesn't work in practice.
Our concern long-term is finding somebody who knows how to maintain a gravel road. It's, you can't just throw somebody on a motor grader and set them free. There's a little bit of an art to it, and those guys aren't out there right now.
I'll go in training.
All right, yeah, very good.
I also want to make a point on the gravel roads too, that they are part of our trail system.
They are.
So, even though it may cost a little bit more per mile to maintain them, I think that's what we're faced with going forward with extension of our trail system too.
Oh, isn't it cheaper for a dirt road?
Pardon me?
It's cheaper to maintain a dirt road
No.
than it is.
No, a lot more
Than a paved road?
Maintain.
No.
Oh, I would say probably
Three
more.
times.
It's more constant maintenance. So with a paved road, we'll pave it and we won't be back for
Right.
5, 10 years, 15, 20, depending on some of the roads. We're back there 3 times a year on every gravel road.
Well, I think what's helped Wood Road are the speed tables that
Yeah.
were placed down there several years ago. Not to say that there still aren't potholes and there are maintenance issues. I think it's helped probably reduce the volume of traffic.
Definitely the speed.
And certainly the speed of traffic, but I imagine they're a little bit more difficult to maintain with those speed tables there too.
They are. Yeah. They get in there. They do pretty good. It's very hard right adjacent to the speed hump, and so you normally see that area pothole a lot faster than the rest of the road, just getting compaction in that area. But
I don't know that we need any more public gravel roads unless they are a specific part of our trail system.
I wouldn't close, leave the option there, but I couldn't see that.
Consider
Your
it as an
first choice.
exception.
And that's, obviously, we're talking about a bond referendum on this as well for the purchase of land, but if we have these roads, maintenance, we said, would not be part of that, right? But is that something maybe we could include that? Just throwing out ideas for, if we had a trail system, gravel road, that we would have, that could be public, could we include, would the cost be worth, and I don't know, I'm not familiar with the construction on that side, but is the cost worth it to do that maybe through our bond referendum? I'm just asking the question. Maybe Ken, you can answer that.
Right, so the last time we talked about that was actually at the work session we had about it. And the answer, which I think I clarified for Councilmember Lusk, was you can do that, you can add a maintenance component, but I did not perceive that's the direction the council was heading. And candidly, I'm afraid, based upon sort of some of the surveying work, that could present a real challenge for our referendum.
Okay.
okay, so I'm going to jump to a section here. I'm going to jump real quickly just to page 65. Skipping over sidewalks just for a second because I want to bring this up. That's part of the existing code so that you're aware of it. And this is line 3, section 2, talking about fixed object mailboxes. And so the existing code does not permit a lot of the larger brick concrete mailboxes that you see along the right-of-way. And I don't know if you are starting to get comments or have heard any comments, but they're not permitted. They're a safety hazard within the right-of-way. When they're hit, we're not permitting them to be rebuilt. When they are started under construction and we catch them, we are not allowing them to continue. And if we get to a case where we are doing road work and the edge of the travel lane is getting too close where we deem them a safety hazard, we're going to have to ask them to be removed. So I didn't want to do anything other than just to bring that to your attention, that they are not safe.
I agree.
So.
Is this on public roads, private roads, or any road?
Public roads, and primarily we're looking at our main roads.
Okay.
While technically they are not permitted in a residential subdivision and can pose just as much of a hazard in there, we have focused more on the main roads and the higher speed roads, trying to get those back into compliance.
But existing inside subdivisions where we already have mailboxes, those can be replaced If it's just a standard.
We-
if it's a
we couldn't-
standard-
I couldn't
standard
permit it.
mailbox, Not the
Oh,
concrete one.
right.
But all new subdivisions require the kiosk thing. The post office won't let you even put
Yeah,
individual
sure, see, that
mailboxes
solves that.
outside of your.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it could be outside
It's
of
like
the
a
right of way,
apartment
you could put your own individual brick mailbox.
You would have to be outside of the clear zone of that road in order to do it. So, in a 35-mile-an-hour zone, you could be 7 to 10 feet from the edge of the travel lane.
One of the real big tips for that.
Yeah.
Well, some of the big grandiose entrances, have plenty
Yeah.
of room, you see where the family, it's-
Yeah, there could be a situation where they're outside of the clear zone or outside of the right-of-way
Yeah.
where they could be permitted
So how long is this requirement been in effect that
forever.
basically?
We used to hear a lot of variant requests, when I was on the Polk County BZA for, monument entrances and mailboxes.
There's one that was wiped out on Freemanville Road and rebuilt within the last.
I'm sure there have been ones built that we don't know about, but we won't permit them, and if we see them under construction, we stop them. And so the reason I bring that up is, one, just to bring it to your attention, and two, the modification that we've got in this particular ordinance where they're not allowed within the right-of-way and require a permit with the city. We've taken out the requirement with the city because we're not going to issue one.
There's no question.
No
Because
question.
the city's not gonna give them a permit anyway.
That's right.
That's right.
So we took it out.
It's just not allowed.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'm going to go back to page 59 to talk about sidewalks and trails. And so in that first section, there was a lot of discussion about the location of sidewalks and our sidewalks to nowhere, and how we deal with that. And so what we were recommending in this is that we limit the installation of sidewalk, and this does not include trails as they're shown on the trail master plan. That'll be a different discussion. So this is the typical sidewalk in front of any residential subdivision to within an area of a half mile or a school, or as what it's worded in yours, or a public park. Planning Commission asked that be a half mile of a school or any active public park. So I could back up and go through some of our CTP results that basically says trails and sidewalks are pretty important to people and where they are. But if you were to look at this drawing, the little brown dot around each star represents a half mile. And each star represents, in this drawing, either a park or a school, or in some cases an activity node like the Deerfield area or the Birmingham area. So the green circle around the brown circle is 1 mile. So in effect, we've reduced it down to sidewalks to be installed as we have seen in the past, and with a normal development, in any of those areas with the star and the brown circle where we have a school or an active park. So that would reduce it down to Bell Park. Bell Park would be our active park.
But the school system will not pick children up unless they're within a mile, or unless the road in which the school is on is deemed to not be walkable.
They do it on a case-by-case basis. So depending on the safety, I've seen them pick up kids across the street from a school because there was no safe way to get them across. So we did have some discussions with the school about how they pick up kids, and if it's not safe for you to get to school, they'll pick you up.
I would assume, just knowing where my kids, where I live and what school they go to and people that are on their route, that most of our main roads must be deemed
Right.
unsafe, except where they have sidewalks. Is that probably a fair statement? Because they go to Summit Hill and we're on Bethany, and then
Yeah, I've not-
people pick up on Providence,
Yeah.
on, in between Bethany and Summit Hill, and that's pretty close.
I know they've picked up kids real close to Birmingham Falls on their bus route. I think the Crabapple area is probably where we see the biggest walk-to-school participation, and their sidewalks.
Yeah.
it's a very walkable type
Now,
area.
keep in mind, this is Milton. Okay, the term probably unsafe is like maybe a 2-year-old leased BMW or something like that.
So, there was also a lot of discussion, oh, I'm sorry.
The qualifying term was active public park.
That's correct.
Okay, we have a park that's going to be active, hopefully, in the near future. So would this apply to Providence Park or any future park?
I guess it would apply if it's active, right?
Well, that's a good question. Providence Park in the short-term plan would be as active as Birmingham Park is now. So do we want to include all parks or just active parks, I guess is the real question.
Well, but a park that's not active now may be active in the future, and then what do you do if, then the city would have to come in and pay for the...
It could. Keep in mind, we'll talk just a second about trails,
Okay.
too, and the installation of trails versus sidewalks. So this would be a typical 5 or 6 foot wide sidewalk where a trail under the master plan is not identified.
Maybe clear that, are we talking about sidewalks around active parks? Why would they not be trails? If we're trying to connect all of these destinations with trails, why should they not be trails rather than 5-foot sidewalk?
In some cases, they will be where that's been identified on the trail master plan. So the trail master plan identifies the type of material, concrete, gravel, asphalt, and the side of the road. In this case, if you're on the other side of the road and within a half mile, then you would be installing sidewalk, and the trail would be on the other side of the road.
This all needs to be coordinated with the trail.
Right. So ideally yes. Yes. So in this, I guess the question is the active park component of it important that we want to include, or should it be around all parks, which would be shown on here? So I'm trying to think if Friendship or Freedom, all of those really have sidewalk associated with them, but Providence Park would be one. Birmingham
Is it going to be part
would
of
be
our
another.
trail plan going to Providence Park?
On one side of the road.
Okay. And same for Birmingham Park?
I have the master plan here. We'll look and see.
It's like at Birmingham Park, when that's developed in however it's going to be developed, you've got existing structures out there, buildings and whatever. Would you, in that case, if it's deemed you need to put a trail or sidewalk, is that the city's responsibility at that point? Because they're not changing or doing anything new building. If we want to make that as far as accessible, we would be putting that in.
Depends on if it's associated with the development permit or a building permit. The developer would be required to install a sidewalk.
If there's new development on
If there's
that
new
property.
development.
Okay.
If a trail is shown on the master plan, then the trail is covered under impact fees, and we would be installing the trail at some point. So that leads me into the next discussion about the trail construction. The other two things real quick that the Planning Commission wanted me to put in here was the ability to activate the sidewalk bank. In other words, if you were to install or were required to install sidewalk but didn't want to do it, or we didn't want you to do it, you could contribute those funds to the sidewalk bank. And when we had a point A to point B, all the sidewalk ready to go, we could come back and use those funds to install the sidewalk at that location.
So no
Does
sidewalk,
it have to be legally where it goes into the bank, but it can only be used at that location?
I would say yes. We couldn't take sidewalk from site A and go across town and install it somewhere else. So it would be used for that location.
I mean, I guess I'm asking the question, maybe it's a stupid question, but it's almost like a tree bank, you know, where you put it somewhere else where it's needed more. There may be some subdivisions that are developed that really never need a sidewalk out there, but then maybe other areas of the city where the public uses it. But
And that's why we limit it to those areas within a half mile of one of these activity nodes. You know, get it to a walkable area where they are either going to a shopping center, a park, a school, rather than throughout the city. So with the green dot shown on this map, you know, it looks like a larger area. If we really trimmed it back to those areas within a half mile, you know, it limits the area within the city that.
I'll tell you, Fulton County used to collect in the sidewalk fund and spend it elsewhere.
I'm sure.
So is that
Yeah.
illegal to do? I
Okay.
mean, there's nothing we can do to make it, because that way we could, like Joe said, is use it where it's needed, and then also I would say use real-time dollars.
Right. I recommend against it because the basis upon which we're collecting it in the first place. I recommend that we keep its location for whence we're collecting it from the standpoint of our legal entitlement to collect it in the first place.
Okay, so last piece that we're going to talk about, I'm going to drop down to page 80, which will be the construction of trails. And essentially what we've done is we've gutted this section to basically say that if you have a trail required, then by the master plan, so the master plan identifies types and locations of trails, that you'll be paying for that under your development impact fees, and we will install it at some future date. Now you've got to provide easements and right-of-way in order to do that. And one of the big discussions we had with the Planning Commission also revolved around the rural viewshed and its relationship to the sidewalk or the trail construction, as well as any easements. And so you could very well have a situation where the construction of the trail and associated slopes to tying back into grade could grade out the entire viewshed. Their recommendation was that we establish the limits of the right-of-way and the limits of the necessary easements to build that trail and start counting the viewshed from that point. So what you end up with is if you were to grade out, and the new subdivision on New Providence is a good example of it, where the slopes to tie back into existing grade after development of the trail essentially went to the edge of the 40-foot viewshed, and you don't have a viewshed there now, but it's replanted and you'll have a viewshed in the future. But Planning Commission was recommending to maintain that viewshed. It would be measured from the existing, or from the edge of whatever proposed easement would be necessary for the construction.
So I know when we asked where all those big mature trees were cut down on New Providence, they had to go back so far because of things. It seems like that's going to be all along that stretch of New Providence. You've got the high point is the road, so any development, you're going to have that challenge as far as sidewalk. And the question is what do you do? What are the options? Without, barring cutting down all the trees like they did on that one and went way back and then rebuilt it up.
You can install curb and gutter, which would bring you a little bit closer to the road. So the way the ordinance reads now, if you don't have curb and gutter, the trail or the sidewalk needs to be 12 feet away from the edge of the travel lane. Installation of curb and gutter, while it's not necessarily a technical barrier to traffic, is a visual barrier and feels good to people when they walk on the trail, and it allows you to bring that trail up closer to the travel lane. Retaining walls would be an option.
So that way you would limit how far back you have to go.
That's right.
Because it seems like that, especially in that area, and there's probably other places that would be developed that have challenging terrain that we ended up destroying, would destroy a lot of the viewshed if in fact we followed that's what I was told, if we followed our old sidewalk plan, we'd end up cutting down just to accommodate the sidewalk.
And so what happens with this, because the trails are part of a master plan, it becomes a system improvement rather than a project improvement. And so as a system improvement that's covered under the impact fees, any right-of-way and easements that are necessary would then be eligible for impact-free credits also. So there is some benefit, or I don't know that that's a benefit, other than it's not as big of a detriment to the property owner or developer as if they were just required to dedicate that right-of-way as they would if it was simply a project improvement as opposed to a system improvement.
Now, would that be something Public Works determines when you look at the specific, when you're permitting or you're looking at the land disturbance and the whole development? That's where you would get into saying, okay, this is the topography, here are the options.
They would physically be required to design it in the LDP process.
Okay.
And just not build it at that point. One of the things that we'll have to get into with legal is how do we differentiate between project and system improvements, because some of those easements are going to be necessary because we installed maybe a left turn lane and pushed that trail out. Well, the construction of the trail is a system improvement, but the construction of the turn lane is a project improvement, not eligible for impact fee credit. So it'll all have to be designed out through the LDP process, and we'll just work through it with the developers.
That's where you should address it.
And they wouldn't build any phase of it, so like the ones on New Providence, there's probably more grading in the trail area than there is in some of the roads.
That's right.
So they wouldn't do anything, wouldn't touch it
So-
until we're ready to do it. We would do it ourselves.
That's right. We become the bad guys at that point, doing all the clearing and installation rather than the developer. So
But they would pay into it.
they would pay through their impact fees. So as each of the homes are built, there's a portion of the parks and recreation fee that would be designated for trails.
So even if that 1,000 feet of trail cost $1 million, they're still going to pay their share of $7,500 a lot, or whatever the impact fee is.
That is correct.
But that affords you the flexibility in those cases to say, no, we're not going to take it back 60 feet, or 40 feet to try to get that sidewalk built or that trail built.
Well, if I understand that correctly, they would be required to dedicate the right-of-way and easements necessary to install it wherever it needs to be installed. And when we come through with the project, so under the T-Splost, if that were to pass this November, we have a number of dollars associated with trail and pedestrian improvements, which would be these trails, but we want to have a point A to point B destination, not a trail to nowhere. But the right-of-way and easements necessary to do that would already be in place.
But
Now, I'm going to come
also-
out.
It's a lot more expensive to build trails certain places than it is others.
Absolutely.
So you're right. I mean, there's no way in the world that the portion of the impact fee for trails would have paid for what was done.
So some places
On
are
New
gonna
Providence
love
Road.
that, because they're going to pay, like I said,
They say-
they're still paying
Right.
their
That's right.
$7,500 a lot, where it may cost them $7,000 a lot just for the trail.
That's right. And, I think all of that probably weighed into the decision on the, I don't want to speak for the Planning Commission other than to say that they did recommend that the view shed be from the edge of the easement out. So ultimately, if you graded that 40-foot easement, then you had a 40-foot view shed, you could theoretically really have a 80-foot view shed at some point in the future when the vegetation on the slope matures.
Plus the 20 with the secondary.
Plus the 20 was secondary.
Question regarding gravel roads. They're designated as part of the trail system. Are we accepting them in their current condition and current cross-section, and at the state that they are to be conforming with our trail design? And as an example, certain sections of Nix Road, certain sections of Wood Road, there is no shoulder at all. So how are you going to make the gravel roads conform to your trail design?
Well, we wouldn't do anything in the short term. If a development were to come in on one of the gravel roads,
Any development?
if at some point there was a eligible development on a gravel road. So Wood Road's got a 8-lot subdivision on it, going on it right now. I mean, there's a development scenario that could happen on those gravel roads. Then we would look to improve that section along that frontage. I don't think it's any secret that my opinion of mixing a trail and vehicular traffic is not my favorite idea.
The secret's out.
Yeah, so any opportunity we have to make that separation, we would certainly look to do that.
In the future. But
In the
not
future.
address anything that's
We,
out there.
we wouldn't do anything now.
What do we do to make sure that the trails that are not paved are maintained? I mean, the trail in front of Birmingham Falls Elementary School looks horrible.
Yep.
I mean, it's not a trail now, it's a,
I don't even think you could tell that it was. I think it's important when you do those types of trails that you definitely have a point A to point B to go to. Use of those trails goes a long way in making sure that they're maintained. Because that trail didn't go anywhere, no one used it, and so it basically disappeared as you see it today.
and once it's gone, I mean,
Well, kind of like the trail up at that subdivision up above Tullamore.
On 372,
It's a beautiful looking trail, but man, that's going to be
state
heck
route.
to maintain. And it's us to maintain it.
yeah,
I mean,
unfortunately, once they're installed, it's our responsibility to maintain.
Yeah, as a state route, you know, I don't know how that paperwork went. I think we would have tried to push that to the state or to the HOA to maintain.
I would
Particularly-
imagine the HOA.
yeah, I mean, they would want
vested
to.
interest.
They
Yeah.
would want to, but I mean, if it's pushed to the state, then they might just pave it one day.
For the most part, where the gravel trails showed up on the master plan and were required to be installed by development, we did not require the installation. We allowed them to pay into the sidewalk bank for that exact reason, that we didn't want to get sections of trails out there that we couldn't maintain until we had the ability to get from point A to point B. I think in our discussions through the T-SPLOS process about where the trails were that we would try and focus our dollars, off the top of my head, I don't believe any of those were gravel trails. I think they were either asphalt or concrete sections. So the development of the gravel trails, which are more in the northern side of the town, probably are far down in our planning process unless something were to change. But
And
that's,
those may eventually be changed to some other.
and those
kind
could
of trail.
change. You know, typically, I think what we like to see in other trail sections is an asphalt or a concrete trail that allows for biking, and then a side, 2-foot gravel or dirt trail that runners tend to like. So, a lot of times there's a combination of materials that seems to work for people. So, we would look at that as we move forward with any of our trail development standards.
Or you could do it the old-fashioned way, which is 2 pieces of asphalt with the dirt, grass in between.
And so I guess with that, that's the end of my presentation. If there's any specific thoughts or comments on it, be glad to take those. And
Anybody have anything?
good, thank you.
Carter, thank you. Okay, if I can have a motion to move into executive session.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion, and a second, to move into executive session. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. We'll be right back.
No, we will.
Yeah.
We will.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
A second. Motion is second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.